A pleasant and prosperous afternoon to my fellow classmates and to our very own Mr. Giovanni Pacaldo. I am here to present our topic in relation to realism, and later on we will discuss one painting that belongs to this art movement. I believe this is very timely nowadays since we encountered a lot of disastrous events, typhoons, the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, and even landslide. We could take inspiration from these heartbreaking situations. We could express ourselves, our feelings, disappointments, and sorrows. By the time we come up with a painting, an output that looks and feels so real, it won't just satisfy our emotions, but could possibly lift and embrace those people in their painful moments. And so, this is the reason why I am saying this to you. Today, I am not just presenting the topic of realism itself, but I was hoping that by the end of my presentation, you'll learn to love and nurture art as its finest. So once again, this presentation is brought to you by Meili Rose. I am Eliza MV7, your very active and enthusiastic reporter. We have Miss Nina Rose Oliverio, our ever-dynamic researcher. And lastly, our very own visual designer by creating a realistic and timely theme, Miss Johanna Lee Nunol. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Allow me to share an overview of the history of realism. In realism, the word real denotes actual or existing. It might be happening to other people's lives. The painting might be created by a son who wants to show love to his mother. Or it could be a scenario of pain and agony for losing a loved one. Basically, it indicates those things or events which exist in the world in its own right. It might oppose the things that are imaginary or fictions. And the knowledge acquired through senses is true. And what we observe and perceive is true based on our senses. So based on the research that we have gathered, the term realism was coined by the French novelist Jean Fleury in 1840s and in art which was exemplified in the work of his friend, the painter Gustave Courbet. The practice of realist subject matter meant scenes of peasant and working class life, the life of the city streets, cafes, popular entertainments, increasing frankness, and the treatment of the body and the sexual subjects. The term generally implies a certain grittiness in choice of subject. Realism is also applied as a more general stylistic term to forms of sharply focused, almost photographic painting irrespective of the subject matter. In its specific sense, realism refers to a mid-19th century artistic movement characterized by subjects painted from everyday life in a naturalistic manner. However, the term is also generally used to describe artworks painted in a realistic, almost photographic way. So I guess I've already answered the question on why is it called realism. On the other hand, I could conclude that realism differs from any other art movement because of it is accurate, detailed, and embellished depiction of nature or of contemporary life. Realism rejects imaginative idealization in favor of a close observation of outward appearances. So the art history of realism focuses on the accuracy of details that depicts and somehow mirrors reality. There is a little room for imagination in this movement since emphasis is placed on observable traits that can be concretized through artworks. Realism was heavily influenced by Hellenistic, and we could arrive with the idea that realism arose in opposition to Romanticism, which had dominated French literature and art since the late 18th century. And realism was not consciously adopted as an aesthetic program until the mid-19th century in France. The art movement of realism is a modern movement in which veered away from traditional arts. In a way, it revolutionized themes and techniques in painting. In addition, it also expanded and widened its existing notions of what can be considered as art. Since artists worked within the context of revolutions and social change, artistic works began to depict real-life events. Idealistic concepts and images were replaced by real manifestations of society, and there is move to combine both art and life in artistic works, since the modern world was suitable for subjects of art. With that, realism rejected the dominant movement of Romanticism. And moving on to the next slide, we have there the list of artists in the movement or period. So we have Samuel Duke Fields, Gustave Courbet, Edward Hopper, Rosa Bonheur, Andrew Noel Wyeth. We have John Francois Millet, Francois Millet. We have Ilya Yefimovich Repin. We have Winslow Hammer. We have honored Victorine Damia and Thomas Copperwet Yakens. So among those artists above, we choose Gustave Courbet as the artist to represent realism because as we've read a lot of aspiring life stories, it is him that I was amazed the most. So to give you a background of the artist, in his childhood life, Gustave Courbet was born last June 10, 1819 in Ornans, eastern France, to affluent farmer parents Eleanor Regis and Sylvie Odad Courbet. He was the only son with three younger sisters. Initially, he made paintings of his sisters Zoe, Zélie, and Juliette, and regularly portrayed his native Ornans. At the age of 14, Courbet received art lessons from a neoclassical art teacher, and then he went to Besançon in 1837 to study the studio of a follower of painter David. As his father's wish, he enrolled in a law school. However, he stopped and transferred to another course or another desire, which is painting, the love of art. So with that, Gustave Courbet submitted a total of 14 paintings at 1855, which is the Exposition Universelle, and presently the collection of his paintings are displayed at Museo d'Orsay in Paris, including a burial at Ornans, the National Gallery in London, the Hermitage Museum, St. Petersburg Metropolitan Museum of Art. We have in New York and other galleries. So we could arrive with the idea that Gustave Courbet was an undisputed leader of realism and a key figure responsible for the rise of the movement. He rejected the predominant romantic and neoclassical schools prevalent in Europe. However, he created real-life scenarios. He painted naked, vulgar women. He addressed the social issues in his art. That's why he is called genius yet a terrible socialist, a savage during his time because other artists, painters could not relate to what he viewed in his own perspectives. But however, I really appreciate how good he was during his time. He was an aspiration for the Impressionists and Cubist artists. Although a lot of people didn't believe in him, but the current generation really admire him for his talent. So moving on to the next slide, we have here a painting that was created by Gustave Courbet during 1850 entitled A Burial at Ornans. We all know that each artist create an abundance of beautiful and realistic artwork, but the artwork that stood out to the most of all was The Burial at Ornans by Gustave Courbet. This is an oil painting created during 1849 to 1850 and is considered one of the most major turning points of the 19th century in French art. So here, he painted a lot of people during the burial who is present in the interment. Usually, they are the town people. So this result gives a pragmatic presentation of the life of Ornans. And also, this is very familiar in our lives since we also attend burials. We also experience the loss of a loved one. No? So with that, the painting possesses elements and principles of design and art. First is the color. The color, Courbet drew inspiration from them for his own color palette, which brings out the atmosphere present in his famous painting called A Burial at Ornans. It uses muted colors, deep shadows which depict sadness, nostalgia, melancholy. Yet there is hope ingeniously suggested by the lighter tones. This is very effective to apply in the painting. We also have value. Upon viewing the painting, the majority of the colors used are dark, and I believe this is to symbolize the pain and agony of the people present in the burial. This painting feels so emotive and expressive, yet visible from the shifting of light to dark colors. We also have space. One can easily identify the well-utilized space between subjects in the painting. The painter must have made it narrow and crowded in order to accentuate the monumentality, solidarity of the occasion, yet the silhouette of the mourners follows the line of the horizon, leaving a wide space for the crucifix. And also the principles of design present in a painting are balance, movement, and variety. There is balance because The grid lines and intersections are considered aesthetically pleasing, and seen in the left side, it is more white colors. However, it is somehow equal to the presence of a white dog on the right side. The mass and density of the people were also strategically placed at the center of the painting, which has strong focal point. And in terms of movement, it is visible in the artwork upon viewing the image that we could feel, look, and later on suggest that it seems realistic and it's not just an event which happens on our man, but also we experience the same situation, scenario in our lives. There is no part wherein we could stack our eyes, however, everything was given equal emphasis. Variety. It is apparent that there is a variety of elements or subjects portrayed in a painting, as we can perceive that there are altar servers, priest, an animal other than the town people. This principle supported that the true essence of realism, as it helped convey the audience, provides a natural setting or an actual scenario, which the burial happens by Courbet's great uncle. And lastly, moving on to the next slide, we have here the summary of interpretation, the citations, and lastly is the acknowledgement. Oftentimes in life, people tend to bend the truth when portraying stories, images, and their lives to make them seem different than reality is. The birth of realism is a result of rejecting romanticism, where it depicts real-life situations. It is one of the major art movements that lead to the existence of other art movements such as Impressionism, Fauvism, etc. The main proponent of this art movement was Gustave Courbet with his famous painting A Burial at Ornans in the year 1850. A Burial at Ornans, now seen as one of the greatest genre paintings, depicts the funeral of Courbet's great-uncle, which took place in September 1848 in the family's birthplace of Ornans, a small town near Besançon in northeastern France. However, rather than using professional models, Courbet used the town people to portray the mourn, the agony, the pain of the people as they lost the uncle of Courbet. And this is to emphasize the truthful character of realism. So as you can see on the other side, we have there the citations, which are taken from different sources. And lastly, the acknowledgement. At the very outset of this project, we would like to extend our sincere and heartfelt gratitude towards all the personages who have helped us in this endeavor. Without their active guidance, help, and encouragement, we would not have made headway in this project. We will take this opportunity to express our profound appreciation and deep regards to the following people for their invaluable help and support. To our Almighty Father for the courage, strength, and guidance He bestowed upon us to be strong every time we are struggling to plan things clearly and make wise decisions, despite the doubts and uncertainties among the members of the group. To our group members who poured their utmost efforts in creating their parts by cooperating and sharing their expertise, advice, assistance, and support to complete the presentation ahead of time. We also have to our dear parents who've always been our staunchest supporters in all we do, to have encouraged us not to give up no matter how difficult the situation is. We want to extend our appreciations for your never-ending emotional and financial support. Lastly, gratitude goes to all the people who directly and indirectly help us to accomplish our activity. So, this ends the presentation, and I hope that I've clearly discussed the art movement, which is realism, and examples of artists and its paintings. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you've learned a lot from this presentation.